In our gospel reading today from John, Jesus is trying to help the people understand that there is something more to life than what they have experienced or what they have come to expect. He is roaming the countryside, giving all that he can to the people in order to make change. Just before the passage we read today, Jesus fed 5,000 people with the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes that were offered by a small boy. And as the story is told, there were 12 baskets left over. Jesus then longs for solitude and makes himself scarce by retreating to the mountain, and the disciples take off in their boats. Meanwhile, there's a storm at sea, and Jesus performs another miracle by calming the angry sea and walking on water. And this is where our reading picks up this morning. The next day, the people realize that Jesus and the disciples are gone, and they climb into boats and set off across the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias, and head toward Capernaum on the other side. There, the crowds finally catch up with Jesus. They asked him when he came there. Notice that he never answers that question. Maybe because he does not want to explain how he got there without a boat and that his sandals are wet. Instead, he says, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves." He's pointing out rather plainly that they are searching not for him or for his truth, but for something more materialistic. They are perhaps seeking out another meal, a handout, a free lunch. He then tells them that they should be hungry for other things that are everlasting and eternal. The conversation turns to a dialogue about signs and assurances. They want proof of what he is saying and some tangible evidence that he is who he says he is and that he has the authority and the power to make this happen. The people remind Jesus, as they really needed to, of their history and the 40 years they spent in the desert, during which time Moses gave them manna to eat. And Jesus corrects them that it was not Moses, but God who provided the food, God who worked through Moses to make the miracle happen. When you think about it, it is an example and proof of his earlier statement in verse 29, that God's work is done when we believe in the one whom God has sent. The people believed in Moses, and God provided. God does all kinds of amazing and miraculous things frequently. God does this through other people, those that are sent. In verse 35, Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." Now, for the majority of Christians around the world, we are taught very early that Jesus is the bread by which we are fed. What Jesus has to offer us is nourishment that is deep and satisfying and everlasting. I know that I am certainly fed by this ministry and message of Jesus. But I also think that Jesus is talking also about more than just our faith. He is talking about the very real and tangible feeding of others. Food. When we look at the history of the feeding stories performed by Jesus, it is endless. He dined with his family and friends. He ate with sinners and outcasts. He fed the 5,000 and the 4,000 hungry people in another story. Food is everywhere. And yes, it can be looked upon as a metaphor for what we need in so many ways, from spiritual nourishment to psychological feeding. This bread that he is offering is both spiritual and material. Jesus did both while he was here on earth. Even at the Last Supper, he offered bread and wine to those who were gathered around him. Eating was and is important, but it's also symbolic. It sustains us in more than one way. Did you know that in the New Testament, the words bread, food, and eat are mentioned over 250 times? That in itself is a signal for us to pay attention to what the message is. But notice what Jesus does not say. And some of you may not agree with me on this. He does not say, "I am the only bread of life." He surely is the bread of life to many, including myself, a source of nourishment But then again, so are we. I think one of the messages from Jesus is that we are also the bread of life, of hope, of compassion for others. After all, we too can be the one whom God uses, not just Moses. We need to feed others in all kinds of ways, physically, psychologically, and spiritually. We must feed others because we are the ones whom God has created and placed in this world to be the hands and feet and hearts of those we serve. This requires us to believe in the one whom God has sent. This requires us to believe in Jesus the Christ, but also to believe in ourselves. You know, feeding just doesn't happen by itself. It takes people, it takes hard work, it takes love and compassion. It takes those who care and those who take the time out of their daily routines and schedules to provide that nourishment. It takes people like me and you to offer the bread to others for sustenance. And this can happen in so many ways, from working at a food bank or donating food, having folks over for dinner, or meeting up with friends to share a meal and conversation. It even involves feeding the birds, the squirrels, our pets, and whatever other critters come into our yard, across our path, or into our lives. Feeding is a sacred responsibility. When we feed, we give. And when we give, we receive. And it means attending to other ways of feeding, like spending time with others, providing a listening ear, holding a hand, making a phone call, sending a card, chatting on Facebook, or just being present with someone who needs that kind of support. Both the material and spiritual feeding that happens is holy, and often they are the same. We all are nourished in some way. When we are on the receiving end of these good works, I think Jesus is telling us that we must follow his example and be the supplier of this nourishment to others. He did say, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." That was a promise that he made to anyone who came to him. Can we make that same promise? Can we honestly say that whoever comes to us will not go away hungry? Whoever comes to us, he will never go away hungry. If someone is looking for compassion and kindness or just human interaction, do we feed them? Or do they go away hungry? If we take the example of Jesus' ministry seriously and follow it, we too can feed others. I'm not sure if we can feed 5,000, but I know there are some of you out there who can prepare a meal for 2 or 20 and perhaps even 200 in the blink of an eye. That's a miracle all by itself. And when we understand that when we offer food, our time, our love, or as Sheldon Cooper from the Big Bang Theory says, a hot beverage, we are walking in the shadow of the saints and feeding on a deeper, more spiritual level. There is another part of this feeling that I want to bring to your attention. We need to seek out nourishment for ourselves as well. We must take care and remember to feed our nature, our body, our existence, our passions, so that we can thrive. It is our sacred responsibility to make sure that we feed ourselves for our own growth. Look for ways to feed your very souls. Each of us is different, and each of us will respond to different practices and events. Words and songs, times and thoughts. But make no mistake, we need to do this for ourselves, for we are God's very own. I know that some of us like to think that we are totally independent, but there is always room to receive a gift from God. There is also space for us to invite this feeding from others. We should always remember that God, dancing or something. We should always remember that God sends others to us as well. Sometimes they call us on the phone, right, Dane? Accept that and cherish that. We should begin to understand that there are times when we need to put aside our pride and our egos, reach out and say to others, I need to be fed. Right? I need to be fed. At this table every week, we provide a simple meal of bread and juice, or a wafer and juice. And we say the words, we bless, we give thanks, and partake of this sacrament. Yes, it is symbolic, but it is also very real. And not only do we come to this table for ourselves to be fed, but by being here in this church and participating, we are providing this communal meal to others for their nourishment of body and spirit as well. As Ted Loder expressed in our contemporary reading for today, we are expectant and long to receive these gifts, the gifts we need, so that we may become a gift for others. This meal is sacred. And by the way, so is our coffee and donuts before and after service. Thank you to the coffee and donuts and the hospitality people. We can spend one-on-one time in communion with God, and that is precious and holy. And when we come together as a community at a meal at this table, we're feeding ourselves and each other, and we become stronger. Today, when we gather for communion, remember that what we are experiencing and offering is that oneness, that through this table, we are all of God's beloved. For too long, this table was denied to others for one reason or another, like those living on the margins, GLBTQ people because of who they loved, single moms, addicts, divorced folks, and a whole lot more who were forgotten or ashamed or bothered. People also imposed an internal judgment and deemed themselves unworthy to come forward. Some were forgotten and forbidden. Things change. And I think we can all proudly say out loud, not here, not today, not anymore. All are welcome at this table. And may God's invitation and word change us forever. May it be so. Amen.